Hello everyone, and welcome to week 2 of the Multifamily Investing Academy's mentorship program. This week we're going to be talking and focusing strictly on the use of master lease options and getting and acquiring ownership and control of a multifamily property. If you remember last week, we talked about bird dogging and wholesaling, and the master lease option concept flows very naturally from that training from last week, and you need to understand why. When you are out there looking for deals every day, whether you're brand spanking new or you've done it for 10 years, you need to be able to look at every single opportunity that comes across your desk and answer the question, how can I make money off this deal? And sometimes it's going to be through bird dogging, sometimes strictly through wholesaling, sometimes a master lease option is another tool in your toolbox, or sometimes you're going to actually buy the property yourself. For every deal, there's a different way for making money on that deal. You know, and that's not really, I don't want to speak in absolutes. Some deals you just really should stay away from. They're just not deals whatsoever. But when you find a good one that comes across your desk, you have to have all the tools in your toolbox to be able to look at it and say, how can I make money on this deal? That's your number one job as an investor, to get paid. So if you're spending all this time looking for deals and you see some things come across your desk, don't try to stick a square peg in a round hole. Look at it and say, what ways can I make some money off this particular deal if I don't want to own it myself? And a master lease option is a great way to do this. Now, we are in week 2 of the program. You should be using some of the techniques that you learned in the last couple of weeks and that you learned at the seminar for finding off-market deals. Next week, we're going to be talking about setting up your marketing systems to be able to automate all of these processes. And then ultimately, in the next couple of weeks, you're going to be making offers. You have to start making offers in this business. Like I always say, if you're not making offers, this is nothing more than an expensive hobby. So start looking for deals that are out there, looking for property packages, getting them in the door, and be prepared to sit down with me on one of our regularly scheduled calls and start to go through those. So let's take a look at what our objectives are for tonight's goals. Here we go. First thing is I want you to get a better understanding of how to make money using the lease option concept. Now, the thing that you want to understand, hold on here. The thing that you want to understand is that it's all about time versus money. When you're looking at a master lease deal or making a master lease, one thing you want to do is make sure that you understand that it's all about the time in order to get the deal accomplished and the money that's involved in there as well. Now, finally, we're going to know when is the right time to use the master lease option. I have seen this concept used incorrectly by new investors. I've seen it being taught incorrectly by some of the gurus out there. It's important for you to understand when to use the master lease option. Now, hold on one second, folks. Okay. All right. Now, as usual, you can always type down the bottom there if you have a question. And if you're listening to this live, you can type in a question in the box down below. If you're listening to this on a recorded version and it's on our webpage and there's a form box below, you can type in your question and we'll get back to you with your answer as soon as we possibly can. All right. Let's get moving on here. First one, step 1. I think it's important that you understand exactly what the master lease option is. And we talk about this quite a bit, and some people just never understand that what you're doing when you say a master lease option is you're really talking about 2 entirely separate contracts. One is the master lease, and then the other one is the option contract. Now, the first contract is the master lease. Now think about what this means. If you're looking at a 100-unit property, there are the potential for having 100 leases on that property. The master lease is when the owner of the property turns to someone else and says, here, you control this property, you fill in my shoes, you do everything that I do on this property, and you pay me a fee for it. In other words, I'm going to lease you this property, and you're going to receive all of the economic benefits from that lease, as well as all of the problems involved with that property as well. So you might think to yourself, well, what's the difference between that and a property management company? Well, a master lease is actually an interest in land, just like an apartment lease is an interest in land. A management contract is a service, a fee for service. It's a service contract. So it's two entirely different concepts in the law. When you're dealing with a master lease, you actually have an interest in that property. You should take that master lease contract as soon as you get it and run down to the registry and record it, so everybody knows that you are the person that needs to be contacted if anything goes wrong. Now, it does not give you fee simple ownership interest in the property. You become a master lease tenant of the landlord, of the owner. So the master lease is not what gives you the ultimate ownership of the property. And you know, in some cases, the beautiful thing about the master lease is you can get in there, you can start working the property, you can find out what it takes to run this property, and you might turn it back and say, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't want this master lease anymore. Evict me. I'm done paying you the rent. I'm walking away. You step back into your shoes and you take it over. That's one of the freedoms that the master lease provides an investor. You might get in there and find out this thing is worse than I ever could imagine. I don't want to touch this thing. I'm going to turn this back over to the owner. Let him have all these headaches back. That happens, folks. So don't be surprised if that could be one of the exit strategies if you're looking at doing a master lease. That's the nice thing about it. You end up buying this property and you didn't know about all these problems, and now those problems are yours because you signed on the dotted line. You own that baby. Well, then you're stuck. With a master lease, you don't have to be stuck. All right. Now, the other contract that we're talking about here, the second contract, is the option contract. The option contract is what gives you that ownership in the property. The option contract is also an interest in land. This you should absolutely run down to the registry and record as soon as the owner signs on the dotted line. Because think about it. Typically with the option contract, there's a fee involved. You're going to pay a fee. You're going to buy this contract, this option, from the existing owner. So you're going to cut him a check and hand it to him. He's going to give you the option of purchasing that property at some point in the future at a set price. Now that is an interest in land. You have a right to that property. Not a full and complete right, but you do have a property right to that interest, to that property. You should take that interest and run down to the registry of deeds and record it. Because if you do not, what can happen is that owner can turn to investor B and say, hey, I'll sell you an option on this property. And he takes another option fee. And then the second guy exercises the option, ends up buying the property, and you're standing there thinking to yourself, hey, wait a minute, I have an option in this property. And he says, yeah, but it wasn't recorded. So this guy's, as far as the law is concerned, this guy's option trumps yours because he exercised it and nobody even knows who you are. So when you get that option contract, always make sure that you record it. So those are the two contracts. When we say master lease, we're talking master lease option, we're talking about master lease / option. Two entirely separate concepts, two entirely separate contracts. Now, the most important thing you need to know is who is a prospect for a master lease option. Who do you offer this to? Who do you make this, put an LOI in on? Now, let me tell you who some of the perfect candidates are for a master lease. And then I'll tell you some of the mistakes I've seen some new investors make regarding this. Okay, from what I've seen in my experience, the perfect candidates for a master lease option, first off, are the properties that are showing less than 80% occupancy. And you might think yourself, well, why? Why is that number? At less than 80% occupancy, that's a distress. That's if it's above 60 or below 90, that property is bordering on distressed. And when it's bordering on distressed, it will never be conventionally financed. It will always require some type of creative financing to make it happen. So when we look at this, and you see a property that is below 80% occupancy, you know you will never be able to walk into a bank and get a loan on that property. It just won't happen. You might be able to go to a hard money lender, but then that's going to change the numbers on the deal entirely. So if you're thinking about trying to get control of this property and take it over because it's got really good bones and there's huge potential, then you've got to have this master lease option concept in your back pocket and pull it out when you see this type of thing happening. Other types of perfect owners are the ones who are tired, old people who have owned their properties for years and there's no debt on it. And the occupancy is crappy, and they just haven't been able to get out there and fix it. They're too tired, and they just want this property off their backs. Man, that is a perfect scenario for a master lease option. When you come into that type of property, you'll say to yourself, "Wow, that one looks pretty good. I like your property, but geez, and I think your price is very fair. The problem is that I can put a down payment down on this property, but I can't get this thing financed. I mean, no matter how much I put down, the bank's going to say this thing is distressed. So here, let me do this. Let me take this property off your hands. I will pay you a monthly rent on the property. Let me build it back up to what I think it should be, and then once I get it to that point, I'll go out and have it refinanced, and I'll buy you out." And they'll see that and think, "Okay, great. You know what? You take it. You see what you can do, and good luck to you." So those are two of the criteria: tired, aged owners, and those with no debt. And then also those sellers who are willing to get creative, and those are typically the motivated sellers. Now, if you remember what I taught you in the class about finding motivated sellers, strictly by going to LoopNet and filling in the keyword motivated. Take a look at that, and last time I checked, there are about 281 properties listed on LoopNet that use the word motivated in their description. Take a look at some of those properties and think about how could a master lease option fit in this particular arena. So think about that. Now, let me tell you where master lease options do not work. Where I've seen new investors come to me and say, "Hey, what do you think about this idea?" And my first reaction is, "Where the heck did you get the idea that a master lease option would fit in this scenario?" And one of the scenarios was a brand spanking new Class A property, and this new investor thought that she could get in there with a master lease option and take control of it. It just would never happen. Why would you ever think that a developer who just spent millions of dollars on this property, he's waiting to make his big, huge payday, would hand the keys to a brand new property over to an investor that has never done this before? Just think of that for a second. It's just not going to happen. So why do you think that you can get in there and make an offer on a master lease option basis and it's going to be viewed as being credible? I mean, sometimes you just have to come back to reality with some of these scenarios. So that's one of the situations that I've seen that they just don't work. Another one that I've seen is typically when the property is performing well and it is listed with a broker and it can be conventionally financed, those tend to be properties that you would never even consider making an offer on a master lease basis. The seller of the property wants his money and he wants out. And that property is performing in such a way that he can do that. So don't take that lead and just run out there and say, hey, I love your property. It's performing great. Why don't you turn the keys over to me and let me see if I can do any better? He's just not going to even give you the time of day. And a lot of times when you're dealing with a broker in this type of concept, they don't get it. They don't understand how this concept is going to work. And the fact is that they don't like it because they're afraid they're not going to get paid. And that's fine. That's the number one rule for all of us. We all have to figure out, how do we get paid in this scenario? So when you're dealing with a broker and you're trying to put across the master lease option scenario, you got to think about it like, this guy's not going to get paid if you're doing a master lease option, typically. Now, sometimes the option fee might be used to pay his commission. That's between them and the seller. But the fact is that if the master lease option is the viable solution to the changing of the ownership of this property, it means that this property would never be financed conventionally anyway, and this broker will never see a dime on it anyway. So you're doing him a favor by trying to get the seller to turn the keys over to you on a master lease basis. So next, let's take a look at the third step. You need to know how to make an offer. All right. To do this, you have to know how to evaluate the deal. And when you are trying to contemplate how to evaluate the deal, you've got to take two concepts into consideration: time and money. It comes down to these two concepts. You need to know two things. First off, when it relates to time, how much time are you going to get for that lease? Okay, let me explain to you exactly what I mean by this. The lease that you are going to sign with the seller has a time frame to it. It could be 12 months, it could be 36 months, it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years. It's all between what you and the seller negotiate. Now, understand the conflict of responsibilities here. I mean, you want this contract to last as long as you possibly can. The seller wants his money tomorrow. So the two of you are right away at loggerheads in the offer process, in that you're going to offer a long period of time and he's going to want as short as possible. So it comes down to negotiations on the deal. Now, just understand this number one rule of thumb. Number one rule of thumb for master lease option: never offer or accept an offer that you have less than 3 years time to fix that property. Okay? Just think about it from a practical standpoint. I once did a master lease option that was 12 months. It was one of the first master lease options I'd ever done. It was a disaster as soon as we got out of the gate. And here's why. The property was non-performing. Now, if you've heard me talk, and if in our one-on-one sessions we've talked about financing of deals, you've heard me say the expression 90 for 90. That means you've got 90 days. You have to show 90% occupancy to a bank for 90 days. And once you can do that, the bank will consider the property to be conventionally financed. So 90 for 90. Now, the property that we looked at was in the 70s. And our exit strategy was to refinance the property with a conventional loan. That means we had to get that occupancy from 70 to 90 in 9 months. Remember, because it's for 90 days, I have to show 90. So I have to hit that 90 mark on the 9th month, beginning of the 9th month, and then keep it above 90 for the next 3 months so that I can go out there and refinance it. But even then, that's not enough time, because it's going to take me time to close on the deal. So I need, within 8 months, I have to take this property from 70% occupancy to 90% occupancy. So right away, it's going to take me 2 to 3 months just to even get my feet wet. So now I'm down to 6 months. So that means I've got to increase the occupancy by about 25% in 6 months. I've got to have, that's essentially a massive lease up. Now in these types of properties, you tend to be dealing with a property that's in a form of distress, typically because you got to plow some money back into it. You got to rehab some units. Well, how long is it going to take me to rehab the units? That just takes more time out of my schedule. So I hope you're understanding right now the picture that it is virtually impossible to get the property to 90% in that short of a time frame, in a 12-month time frame. So don't even bother. You'll just be setting yourself up for disaster. Make sure that you give yourself that at least 36 months, because there's typically going to be rehab. There's typically going to be a lease-up period. There's typically going to be moving people out of the units and moving the good tenants back in. That takes a lot of time. So you want to start at 5 to 7 year negotiation for the term of the master lease. Never let it get below. Never let it get below 3 years. Now you get a 5 to 7 year master lease. It doesn't mean that you have to handle a master lease all that time. You can write the option contract so that once you exercise the option at any time during that 5 or 7 year period, you end up getting the property. So, just give yourself a lot of time. That's where the biggest problems come in on a master lease option. Now, the next thing that you got to take into consideration is the money. And this could make the deal or break the deal. Now just think about it for a second. You walked into the seller and you said, let me take over your property and I'll pay you this fee, blah, blah, blah. So you go out there and you say, all right. The seller says, take it over. It's all yours. So you take it over and you're, oh boy, this one's yours now. And the day after you take it over, the pipe breaks out to the road, and you got to hire an excavator to come in there, and for $6,000 he fixes the pipe. Day 2 of your control of this property is a $6,000 bill. Who pays that? Cash flow is not what it needs to be. You just got yourself a big bill. Who's writing the check for that $6,000? If you didn't put protections in the master lease regarding capital improvements like that one, then you are going to be the one writing that check. It's probably not what you expected on day 2 of the control of this property. So make sure that you understand the who pays for what when you take over that master lease contract. Now, it doesn't mean that that has to be the way it is at all the time. You can structure it. Sorry about that. You can structure it so that any money that you contribute in the form of capital expenditures can go towards reducing the purchase price. So that's one way of getting your money back out of the deal. You can say that for capital expenditures, the seller is going to do those things. That's his responsibility as the master landlord. So you have him pay for those types of things, and you are only responsible for operational expenses. Just like if a tenant leased a house, he would pay for the upkeep of the yard and some minor fixes around the house, but he's not going to replace the roof. He's not going to go put in a new furnace. The same concepts can be true on the master lease deal as well. So think about that when you're drafting the contract. And if you're my client and you're in this program, we are going to write the contract. If you make an offer on a master lease basis, we're going to write this contract so that you're protected. Now, the other question is, how do you calculate the lease payment? Wow, great question. How do you do that? Everything is negotiable. Now you might look at it and tell the guy, hey, you're at 70% occupancy right now. We're barely breaking even. I can't afford to pay you a lease payment. You're not taking any money off this property every month as it is. So don't think I'm going to walk in here and just start paying you. You know, we've got to put this property back together. If you want your money at the end of the day in the form of buying the property, of me buying the property. So let me take this money and plow it back into the property, and then you'll get we'll be able to exercise this option a lot faster. So don't give away that lease payment. It may be called a master lease, and the guy's thinking that he's going to get a check every month. But if the property's not performing, no one's getting a check off this property. You have to work hard to get it up to where it needs to be. So he might not be entitled to any type of lease payment because the property just can't sustain it. So be tough in your negotiations with the seller. Typically, remember, it's a tired old owner, and they just want out. They don't need the money. They haven't been taking money off this property for years. They just want to know that, hey, you just gave me an option contract that you're going to buy this thing from me for $5 million in 5 years. Hey, that's good enough for me. I'm not going to be around. Let it be a problem for my kids. You take over this property. Build it up as much as you possibly can. Good luck to you. So the other way that you might want to think about doing this is having some type of a formula that the landlord, the master lessor, he gets a percentage of the NOI. So you don't give him any money if the property is not making any money. So that's one way of structuring the lease payment to the seller. Now, next, let's talk about the option contract. And we mentioned this briefly at the beginning of the discussion, that the option contract is an interest in land. It's the second contract in this deal. It's essentially what you're telling the seller you will buy this property for at some point in the future. Now, here's the tip. Even though they're two separate contracts and they can be, one can be sold and one can be, kept together. You can sell off the option. You can, sell off the master lease and keep the option. It's entirely up to you. Two entirely separate contracts. But here's my advice to you. Always make sure that the master lease contract term is equal to or lesser than the option fee. All right? So you never want the option to be extinguished while you're still managing the property. Your whole payday is in how well you negotiated that purchase price, and so that whole payday you don't want to see walk out the door because you're still putting that property together, and you just negotiated an option contract with not enough time to it because you're not done cleaning up the property. So always make sure that the time frame for the option contract is equal to or greater than the master lease term. So, if the master lease goes away and you don't want to deal with it anymore, okay, walk away. But you know what? You negotiated a longer term on the option, so you still have 3 years on that property. That guy can't buy or sell that property unless you say it's okay. There's an option on it. So let's talk about the terms on an option contract. There are really only two terms when you're talking about an option contract. First term is how much are you going to buy this property for in the future. Now, this gets into a little kind of complicated, present value of the property, the cash flow on the property, and what it's going to be worth at some point in the future. Now, remember, folks, don't be stupid here. Don't overpay for the property in the option contract because you'll be doing all this work for someone else's benefit. If you want this property to be worth buying, you're going to negotiate today a very low price. And so what you're going to do when you're looking at this deal is to look at it and say, right now this property is worth $1 million, and I'm stretching it. But if I can get the occupancy above 90% consistently, and at the current interest rates, and maybe we'll bump up the interest rates because in a couple of years things are going to be changing, and if I put this amount of money down, I can get the value of this property up to $2 million. I know I can do that. I mean, this is a cream puff of a property. I got to get control of it. So what you do is you say, hey, I'll buy your property for $1 million in 3 years. And they come back, say $1.5 million, and you say $1.25 million. You negotiate it. But the whole point is that you've done your homework today in order to calculate out what the value of this property is going to be in 3 to 5 years. And that's where you're going to realize your profit. Remember, you make your money in the multifamily business or in all real estate when you buy the property. So make sure that when you negotiate the option contract, that's going to be your big payday down the future. All right. Now, keep in mind that typically in an option contract, you pay a fee for that. So you're going to be writing a check to the owner for a certain amount of money just to buy this option contract. There's a value in that option, so that you have to provide some form of consideration for that value. Now, when the second term is when do you exercise the option? Now, keep in mind what we talked about before was the fact that you can exercise that option at any time during that option period. You don't have to wait till the very end. So if you negotiate a 5-year master lease, you want to get at least a 5-year option. But if things start taking off and this property is smoking and this property is doing great, and you just want to take it over and own it on a fee simple basis, then what you do is you exercise the option 2 years early. Where you said that you wanted a 5-year option, but you exercise it in the 3rd year. And the seller is out, gets his money, and you get the property. So you can always exercise the contract earlier, or you want to make sure you write it so that you can exercise it earlier. That gives you a whole lot of freedom. And the seller likes that. They want to know that you could possibly buy them out sooner if this situation arises. So, really, folks, that is it when it comes to the master lease. It is a great tool to have in your toolbox, but you should never lead with it. Don't walk into a property and say, hey, I want to offer you a master lease. They're going to look at you and say, like, oh, and who are you, and why am I interested in that, and how do I benefit from that? What you need to do is go in there and say, hey, I've analyzed your property. It's not a very good property. You have not been running this thing well. This is not good. I can't even get it conventionally financed. There's no bank that's going to give me a mortgage on this property. But here, let's talk about doing this. And then you switch gears right into the master lease option scenario. So I hope that was helpful to all of you. That is essentially the extent of the master lease option training. So keep it in your tricks. When you see a property that's not performing, pull this out. Now, what I've done is I've included I sent you all a letter, or it's going to be on this web page. If you're watching this video from the web page, I've included 2 documents. I'm sorry. Let me before I jump into the documents, there's one other aspect I wanted to talk about is, when I said don't lead with the master lease option, what you want to lead with, or you want to pull out this option, the best time to do it is when you've got a ding letter from your lender. And now if you have a good relationship with your lender and you can go back to the lender and say, hey, I really like this property. There's no way you're going to finance it. Can you give me a ding letter? And so he gives you a letter, a rejection letter. And you look at it and you say, okay, hey, Mr. Seller, I just got back from my bank, and here's what they said about your property. They're going to reject it. It's I can qualify. I've qualified for lots of properties, but in this particular case, you just can't. I just can't do this. But I have an idea. Let me tell you about this concept where I can step in, I can fix your property, and I'll buy a property from you. I'll stick around. I'll make it work, and I'll be the one to buy your property for you when the time comes. And that's the best time to pull out the concept of the master lease option, is when you've got a rejection letter in hand, because the property cannot be financed. So the guy wants out. What are you going to do for him? You got to get something else. You got to give him some other alternative here. So that's the best time to introduce the master lease option, is when you've got a ding from a bank. So finally, getting back to what I was saying before, is on this in the email that I sent you, or in the web on this website, if you're watching it from the website, there are two documents. There's a master lease option direct mail letter. It's pretty generic. It talks very briefly about certain concepts that we just discussed, but it gives you a little something to use, a little crutch if you're doing a direct mail campaign. Feel free to go ahead and use it. Change it as you see fit. That's for your consumption. The other thing that's on the documents is the master lease option letter of intent, which is different than the other two letters of intent that I use, the short form and the long form. This is entirely, strictly for master lease option. It takes into consideration some of the things that we discussed that you never even think about when you're making an offer on a fee simple transaction. Such things as the term of the option, who pays for what, those types of things. So pull down this master lease option letter of intent, have it in your toolbox, so the next time you come across a deal like this, you got something to show the owner. And as usual, if you're in my mentoring program and you're thinking about this and you're looking at a deal and you're wondering whether you should do it or not, shoot me a text. Let's get on the phone and start talking and see if we can figure it out for you. So that is the extent of our discussion tonight. I hope this has been helpful to you. Next week, we're going to be dealing with the marketing aspect of marketing and the automation of the marketing for finding your multifamily deals. And it's all a system. It's all a numbers game. I sat down. I had lunch yesterday with a gentleman, a friend of mine, who owns 3,500 units, and he was very, very quick to confirm that this is a systems-oriented business, that this is just a numbers business. It's, as he said, I'll look at 100 properties, I'll make 10 offers, and 2 of them will be accepted. Folks, those are the exact same numbers that my sales manager at the insurance business told me I would do when I got into the business. I would call on 100 people, I would make 10 appointments, and I would sell 2 people. I didn't know why I'm not in the insurance business anymore. But those were the numbers. It's a numbers game. Games always work like that. So go for it. See what you can find. In the next couple of weeks, pull down property packages. We're going to start making offers, and we're going to talk to brokers, and we're going to push you out the door, push you out of the nest like those baby pigeons. So everyone, have a great night, have a great day, have a great week, and stay focused a little bit every day. That's all you need. Have a great night.